Hey, welcome everybody tonight to our my weekly Tuesday night webinar. Um, my son always gets on me about always shaking my hand and introducing everybody to people. And I met Dr. Outlaw on a very horrible day in Oakland A's history, where you went to the A's playoff game, and I was excited about going to the games this year, but it has been put off to until this COVID-19 is over with. So tonight we have Dr. Outlaw, who is the clinical director of Journey Life Psychological Inc. Psychological Inc. And so I'm thankful for him to give us our time. It's been a good relationship since that A's playoff game. We built a good friendship, even though the A's lost in that horrible day against the Tampa Bay Rays. So I want to say thank you again for him to come out tonight for it.
Certainly, I appreciate you having me, and this gives a good opportunity for us to talk about the psychological impact of COVID-19. And everyone is affected in different ways, and not everyone may want to talk about it, or not everyone may want to admit how they're affected, but it certainly is affecting everyone. And sometimes it's clinically significant to the point where someone such as myself is necessary to help someone along in dealing with the stress, and sometimes people can manage it on their own. I certainly recommend that people just be really aware and cognizant of what they're experiencing. And one of the easy ways of telling kind of how something has impacted you is to take a look at your sleeping patterns, take a look at how much energy you have, how much motivation you have. Those are some kind of subtle ways in which we can tell about the impact that something has had on us. Some of us are very resilient. We can make it through and never really need, professional sort of help. But one of the pillars of my personal and professional business is to reduce the stigma around mental health and get people just kind of talking about it and understanding that you don't have to be crazy, or you don't have to have schizophrenia for someone to need mental health services. And so I just want to kind of start with that.
Definitely. Yeah, I saw an article that said 50% of Americans have some type of suffering from mental health in some capacity right now. And I know right now they say that. I know they say the domestic violence cases that actually have went up. What are some basic things that people could do so they don't go crazy staying inside the house?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So the first thing that I'll say is we all are dealing with uncertainty. And anytime that you're dealing with significant uncertainty to the point where we have no idea if this thing is going to be done and over with next month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, a year. But when you're dealing with uncertainty, we can't expect that we just happen to function fully as our normal selves. And so it is important just to recognize that we all have been impacted to a certain extent, and we can make it to where this is something that we deal with in a way in which we become stronger people, or we can kind of fall victim to it. So to answer your question, how can we deal with it and kind of stay sane? Anything that you can do that helps you maintain normalcy is ultimately my biggest recommendation. Whether that's you really like cooking at home, and or you enjoy, jogging, or you enjoy some sport, or you enjoy watching sports on TV, enjoy hanging out with family, whatever it is, you might not be able to do exactly what that thing is, but you can do some version of it. And what I mean by that, I'll give you an example. So if you are into hiking, for example, now of course, arguably we can hike because you can maintain your 6 feet distance and that not be a problem. But if for whatever reason you don't feel comfortable hiking, you might want to, research online kind of what's the next best set of hiking shoes that are out there. You might even take a virtual tour of someone hiking in the Alps, or ultimately what I'm saying is you want to do some version of that. A lot of times people are like deciding to wait until COVID-19 is over before they live their life again. That's not what you want to do. You want to maintain normalcy in any way possible And that can be just as simple as figuring out what permutation of what you're interested in is going to allow you to kind of continue. Okay, so that's kind of my first recommendation. Secondly, you got to get creative, right? And so if you have young children at home, one popular method that I recommend is just doing a good old-fashioned, old-school treasure hunt around the house, right? So by doing a treasure hunt, you're including the kids, you include the adults as well, and it's something that you might not be necessarily accustomed to on a day-to-day basis, but it gives you an activity, it gives people a little bit of cognitive exercise, and they can actually, feel like there's a goal-oriented sort of thing. You can also, with adults and children, you can do like a cook-off, right? Like you can include the children, and mom and daughter and dad and son are going to be on two different teams, and we are going to come up with the best dish that we can make. And we're going to have the different family members rate whose dish was best and whose dish wasn't so good. These are just kind of a couple different examples, but you have to do whatever it is that just kind of feels like it's maintaining normalcy in your life. Monopoly, Jenga, the board games, those are, of course, things that you want to pop out. You can also do a virtual vacation. What I mean by virtual vacation is you may decide that you want to go to Thailand in the next couple of years. You can research the heck out of Thailand online. You can go to people's YouTube videos online and kind of plan out an itinerary, if you will. I'm quite sure that people have the point of view sort of versions of their videos of being abroad as well. So there's lots of things that you can do, but if you kind of get the gist of what I'm talking about, is you want to avoid isolation and waiting until this thing is over before you do anything.
Okay. How can people keep themselves up who've been like, right now they say over the last 2 weeks we had about 10 million people file for unemployment. The numbers for this week haven't been out yet. What do you have for those people who lost their jobs, who down and out, who's stressing about paying their rent, paying their mortgage, who's waiting for that unemployment check, but hasn't came yet? What would you recommend for those type of folks who's going through it right now?
Yeah. Well, it's tough on everybody, right? And so you hit the nail on the head with individuals who have lost their job, people who have ultimately, whether they already lost their job or they're fearful that they're going to lose their job if things don't turn around in the next 30 days or so. It's really tough, and people need to understand that this is an unprecedented time in our country's history to where we are having to really, really show how tough we can be around even the financial piece. But once again, you're not crazy or you're not off base if you're worried or you're anxious about, oh my God, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to pay my rent. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to have food on the table. We actually experience anxiety and some of the other emotions as human beings with no choice. This is how we were built as human beings. And ultimately, anxiety and fear is one thing that kept us, that protected us from other sorts of predators out there. If we didn't experience anxiety and our adrenaline didn't start to pump when a wild animal, for example, was in our vicinity, we may not have the ability to get away from it. And so it's the same thing, although it looks differently in modern day when it comes to us worrying about what are we going to do in reference to not knowing if we can pay our bills. By you worrying about that, it's going to prepare you for what am I going to do if this in fact comes to fruition, right? So you may say to yourself, oh my God, what am I going to do here? Oh yeah, I forgot. I have a savings account, or I also have a line of credit, or I have this family member who, certainly seems to be generous. All those things are a result of our anxiety and our worry, and they're natural things that need to take place for us to survive, right? From a modern sort of standpoint. Above and beyond that, I'd say for people who have gone through a pretty tough time, they want to do the same thing. They want to avoid falling victim to isolation, falling victim to negative thinking. And this may sound easier than what it actually is, but you have to maintain a certain level of hope and optimism that you will get out of it. mean, it certainly is very possible that many of the people who got let go are going to be picked up once this thing is over and done with. I've even had a couple clients who have said they got laid off, but their boss told them that, you know, in Q2 or Q3, we want to bring you back on, of course, if things have changed. And so those are a couple of things that I think are relevant.
Okay, nice. Now, with people who might be in a negative state of mind, what are some things how you can click right back to be positive? Is it meditating or any other practices they could do, or what do you recommend for that?
Well, you know, there's no magic way of getting people to get out of negative thinking. And the first thing is people have to be aware of when they do engage in negative thinking. And that can be easier said than done too. A lot of times what happens is that our thoughts happen at rapid fire in a subconscious manner until we find ourselves really upset or really sad or even in a depressed sort of episode. You don't have to have a conscious thought to have a thought. It doesn't have to be out loud. You could, for example, have lost a relationship. For example, your significant other broke up with you, and you're just at home, just kind of going through that process. And without much conscious thought, you've thought about how, oh my God, I'm getting older. Who's ever going to want me from here? Um, I've been through this numerous times. I don't think I want to try this again. I'm going to be on my own forever. I'm getting old to the point where I'm going to need somebody to take care of me at some point. All these negative thoughts can happen in a split second without you thinking much about it. And so the first step is that we have to have the consciousness and awareness to be able to know when we are engaging in that level of thought. And the best way of knowing when you engage in that thought is how do you feel? So the feeling comes first, and then the thought happens, and then the behavior follows thereafter. And so the more consciousness and awareness that we have, it gives us an opportunity at actually getting out of it. So the moment that you're aware of, oh my God, I'm you know, going down that pessimistic road again, then you want to take that time to engage in what we call thought stopping. And so it's like, all right, let me get myself together, pull yourself together out of this negative sort of thinking, and let's what we call cognitive reframing. We want to now engage in what we call cognitive reframing. So what's a realistic, positive alternative to the negative thinking? And so using that same example, a cognitive reframe could be, well, you know what? As much as I'd like to be in a relationship, right now that's not in my cards, and I'm healthy and I have my finances in order. And if it's meant to be, I'll find someone else. That's just kind of a quick example. And that works for me. What works for you and works for someone else might be slightly different, but you have to be able to be aware of your negative thoughts. You have to be able to stop that. And you also have to be able to replace that with something more positive and realistic. And it has to be realistic. You can't just make something up positive out the air and expect that that's going to change your line of thinking. It has to be realistic along the way.
I look better than Beyonce or something like that.
Exactly.
She don't got nothing on me.
Sure,
Right.
sure. All of that.
Sometimes I feel like we're in like tight quarters with people right now at home with our spouses. Like, is there some set rules or guidelines that we should have for we can lower the domestic violence, or not even saying we have domestic violence, but just the friction, the conflict, or the beef with our spouses? Anything you recommend for that?
Yeah. The DV is starting to rear its ugly head, and you can imagine. Let's just take the average couple where one or more people go to work, right? And so from roughly 7:30 a.m. to roughly 6 p.m., you know, they're not in the same place. Now you put people in the same proximity for an enormous amount of time. You can imagine that the frequency of material in which you might have an argument or a disagreement is higher, right? And so not only can you have more frequent arguments, but now when maybe you might, you know what, I'm going to the office, I'm going to the gym, or going to my boy's house, or what have you, you don't have that uh, as a coping strategy, and you got to deal with it right then and there. And so that's kind of the origin, at least theoretically, in terms of what's contributed to a little bit higher DV levels. Now, here's what I'll say in terms of a piece of advice. We expect that our significant others and our spouses and our family members and our kids and everyone is able to deal with COVID-19 and isolation and social distancing in a way in which they just deal with it, right? Like, we all are in this together. You need to deal with it the same way I do. My recommendation is for us all to understand that people deal with things differently. There's people who are much more resilient and people who are much tougher. And there are people who are kind of always existing on a boiling point level. And any little thing is going to tip them over on that edge. And now they're in a crisis. So my advice is just really recognizing that everybody is not the same in terms of their emotional resiliency and their emotional intelligence. And we have to show some patience and some understanding. Above and beyond that, I certainly encourage people to engage in de-escalation techniques when they can, right? So if someone, their voice is getting high and they're getting really argumentative, you want to lower your voice and try to show some understanding, and you hope that they match you where you are. It can be very tough, once again, especially the size of living quarters. Sometimes people are living in, one bedroom apartment, sometimes it's a studio. And so it's even harder when you got kids who are normally at school, at least one parent who's normally at work, and kids are, demanding McDonald's, for example, and you can't do that. And so they're frustrated. And now you got kind of this perfect sort of mixture for a problem. So it really does require everyone to have a cognitive insight of everyone doesn't deal with things the way that I do, and I need to respect that.
Yeah. What do you recommend for, children right now, or how do you explain this situation towards kids? Oftentimes the kids are used to, for my son, we play baseball. We're supposed to be in a harder baseball season right now, playing travel ball, practicing 2-3 times a week. We can't, now they're telling us we can't go to the park. So how can we explain this to our children and build that mental health that they need during this period of time?
Yeah, you raise a really good point. And the age of the child is going to be important, because there's a difference between a 4-year-old and a 14-year-old. So from a developmental standpoint, a 14-year-old has the ability to understand that things happen in the environment that are going to affect the outcome of what I normally do. A 4-year-old might not be able to understand that. And a 4-year-old may, they're kind of still stuck in their immediate gratification stage, and they have a much harder time at understanding something being taken away from them and the purpose of that. So that's the first piece of advice I have, is recognizing that the age difference. Secondly, I say it's kind of my initial comment that I made earlier. You have to be able to do some form of what makes you happy. So you use baseball as an example. So you might not be able to compete. You might not be able to have all your friends around and pitching each other baseballs and so forth. But you can actually go to, on demand and watch. You can even watch the Little League World Series, for example, for your young person, and help ask him, I want you to pick out who's your favorite player in this whole World Series here. You could certainly, let's say that he was struggling with bunting. I'm using it as an example. You could go to YouTube and find some coaching videos on bunting and try to build up at least the theory of how do you execute a bunt correctly. And so that's kind of what I mean. And the young people are going to say, oh, well, this isn't the same. And it's not the same. And we have to all understand that it's not the same. But there is a difference between saying, well, we can't go outside, with shelter in place. We'll do that when this thing is over, and getting creative and trying to do some of the things that I just mentioned.
Yeah. And what about those people, there's a lot of kids, young adults, high schoolers who are supposed to graduate, and then now they're going to walk that line, and, those people in your senior year who are supposed to be college graduates not crossing, or those athletes who thought, hey, this is my senior year in the spring running track for college or high school, and now they have this disappointment. How will you tell them how they should deal with that disappointment where they feel like they worked hard, where they're able to achieve something, and they got taken away because of this COVID-19?
Yeah, no, you're completely right. That's a tough position to be in. And just to kind of summarize what you said. There's people who no longer get an opportunity to go to their senior ball or their junior prom. There's people who will not get a chance to graduate and walk across the stage. I mean, just even think about Morehouse College. Last year at graduation, that's where the billionaire he wiped out everyone's student debt. And they didn't know that beforehand, but at graduation, they got word that they're not going to owe any money on their student loans. And this year, not only do they not get their student debt wiped away, but they can't even go to graduation. And so these are unfortunate circumstances that no one made a choice for, but we have to kind of be able to deal with it in the best way possible. In reference to what do you tell young people who might have been strongly disappointed by this whole thing, the fact of the matter is that the truth is there, right? Like there's no really good way of candy coating that and making people feel better about that you can no longer do your 8th grade or your college graduation. It is what it is. But what I think that you can do, and of course it does take some resources for this, but you can recognize your young person in a way that shows them that although you can't do graduation, although you're not going to do prom, I'm going to get creative and I'm going to make it so that you're recognized anyway. And so, for example, I'm just thinking of like a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old kid who wants to do junior prom. No longer do you need to go get a tuxedo. And so I'd ask my 16-year-old, well, what would you like instead? We're going to do a photo shoot. I'm going to take you shopping. I'm going to allow you to pick out what you want in one outfit. And we're going to make it so that although you're not at prom, you're going to be swagged out in either way. And so that's, once again, that's a version of what would have happened in terms of excitement around a prom, for example. In a graduation, I'd recommend still getting the cap and gown and doing something at home with the people who are actually there. So, my point is that you can get creative with some of this stuff. It's not going to tap into the exact feeling that you get if these things weren't cut off, but it at least gives them a chance of being recognized and they're not completely disappointed.
Yeah, that's good. That's good to know. Those are really good ideas. I see adults, I see everybody doing the happy hours on Fridays on Instagram Live. And I have a friend, my really good friend who DJs, and he's still DJing for people, making it feel like it's a party at home. So
yeah. I mean, and
different room.
Yep, what you just said a second ago, and I'm not the most technologically advanced person, but I guess I've seen people do kind of Zoom conferences where, it's all the people that they really care about are all on this platform together, and they're wishing someone happy birthday who isn't able to celebrate their birthday. So you can certainly apply that to graduation or prom or any sort of major event, to where the people who you care about are somehow they're able to recognize you as well. So you can do that. You probably could get a DJ for pretty cheap these days to find 30 minutes of being on Zoom and pay them a couple $100 or whatever, depending on, of course, who the DJ is, and even do some of that as well. So creativity is the part that I think is a theme that we really have to make sure that we incorporate here.
Yeah, American ingenuity at its finest.
This is
Definitely.
true.
Yeah, let's open this up to answer anybody have any questions. Please go ahead and feel free to ask any of those questions.
How do you feel about having your own primary internal confidence and peace of mind, but if you have family members or coworkers, extended family who tend to kind of panic or go down that lane of negativity in their thinking or awareness, what do you recommend on how to handle that? Because you still have to interact with these people on a certain level. What do you recommend?
Yeah, Vicki, that's a great question. And so one common element is the individuals who are able to have some emotional resilience. They may feel a little bit guilty about the fact that you're able to endure this time period, and friends and coworkers and colleagues and family members, other people are not able to show that same level of emotional resiliency. So I want to recognize and acknowledge that part first. In addition to that, what I recommend is being a resource, offering yourself as a resource, whether it's a resource of information or it's a resource for emotional resource, or whatever it is that you can offer, letting people know that they're not alone, and that although you might not be a professional in this, that you're willing to help in any way possible, whether that's sharing what's worked for you or merely being a vessel in which they can vent to you. That's about all we can do right now. And I've seen that come to fruition with a couple of different people, and people certainly feel guilty. Like, man, I really hate that my spouse is going through this so much. She lost her job and I still have my job, and I'm feeling a little bit guilty about it. And so same sort of thing in that example is, what can you offer in terms of being a resource that might help that out a bit. But there is no magic pill and no great solution for it, but we can certainly be a resource and offer what we can do.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, I seen that even with my wife, where her job got where they laid off, a good amount of people in one day, and but she didn't get laid off, and I know she felt bad, or people she was friends with at work called or texted her, and it was giving her criticism or making her feel bad about it. So yeah. I definitely understand that aspect where they're like, you got your job and stuff. So
yeah,
there's a lot of criticism.
It's pretty hard to not feel like I want to sit back and hide and not be in the forefront, when that example you gave about your wife's job being saved and other people's jobs aren't. But same sort of element is, if she can, offer whatever support she can, at least that shows that she's not this, uppity person that's, only selfish in that sense.
Definitely. Do anybody else have any other questions?
I think there's two that are on mute. I can see a mute button for Jamal in the 422252. And it might be on their end as well. They may have their audio muted, but it looks like only Vicky and Tashoni are able to speak from what I can see.
Question. This is Tashawn. Hey Jason, what's up, dude?
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. How you doing?
Doing good.
That's good. Thank you for hosting this. I wanted to ask, I know what you were talking about kind of the way that, the conflict arises in space when people are sharing space with one another. And you mentioned some really, really good stuff about like being able to notice thought patterns. And I wonder where you see the overlap and the ability to utilize similar resources.
Even a little too much sun in the sky.
Who's that?
I think that was 422252. There you go. All right, go ahead.
Oh, is that a hacker? Is that one of the hackers? Okay. People have been hacking into like Zoom conversations.
I get it.
Don't be surprised. But yeah, that's what I was wondering. Like seeing the overlap between the two, and do you see any benefit in, some of what you shared initially in I wish you could see me. I'm talking with my hands like you can see me. But in the overlapping and resourcing yourself and your relationships across the two, I guess, those two ways of approaching.
Okay. Let me answer, and then let me know if I'm capturing what you're asking here. Mm-hmm. The gist of it is, are we aware of the fact that human beings are different? It could be your spouse, who you feel like or your significant other you feel like top to bottom. And there really haven't been, in your experience, much of a significant emotional impact based on the experiences that person has had. And based on isolation, not being able to engage in one's hobby, not being able to take a flight to not being able to go to a funeral because only 10 people can go. There's all sorts of restrictions that are in place, and it's pretty difficult to determine exactly how an individual is going to be impacted. And so what I was getting at was just a certain level of conscientious understanding that we all deal with things differently. And even if your perception is that this is like the strongest person that I know, I love this individual because they can take anything. COVID-19, in terms of what it's done just thus far, might show a different side of your significant other that you might not have seen before. And it doesn't always have to look like depression and anger. It can look like anxiety. It can look like, true sort of distancing and withdrawing away. It can look like displaced anger. It can look really, really different. So anytime you see a behavior or a pattern that might not be something that you've recognized in the past, you want to make sure that that you ask yourself, how much of this is due to what's going on in the world right now? And am I able to connect with this individual in a way that shows that I have unconditional love for this person and I'm willing to be there as a support as well? So I'm hoping that answered your question.
Yeah, even as you're talking, it just dawned on me that there's so many people that you spend so many hours a day at work and you never really get a chance to understand someone's habits and ways of being. And that is this has completely opened up a whole new world for people that they don't get to experience. So that literally just hit me as you were talking about, like, even the compassion piece.
Sure. You're 100% right. And so we spend most of our conscious hours at work. Now, you have the traditional sort of 8 to 5 sort of job. You wake up, you may eat breakfast or have a cup of coffee, you go to work, and you all the way until lunchtime, you're working, and then post lunchtime, you're working as well. And then by the time you get home, whether it's preparing dinner or ordering out or what have you, you're kind of winding down for the next day. And so you're 100% right. How much do we actually spend time getting to know our partners and significant others and even our children, right? Because it's the same thing. They're at school during the day. And so I agree. It opens up a world for us it doesn't have to be an hours and hours sort of thing, but one other recommendation that you just kind of sparked a memory for me with is that we can even spend part of our shelter in place time getting to know each other a little bit better. It can be a 15-minute sort of family thing of, tell me something about you that I don't already know. And you go round robin across the table, and everyone has to say something that they think that the other people at the table don't already know. And someone may know that piece about them, but someone may not. And so it definitely gives us an opportunity at getting a little bit more in depth in the relationships that we have. So that's a good point, Tashani.
My name is Tashawn, by the way.
Tashawn. Okay, sorry. I was
drop that O a little bit, Tashawn.
It's just like when people put too much of the on my name. Jaseon, not Jaseon. So
this is kindergarten, so I understand totally.
For sure.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah. Is there any other last questions at all? All right. Thanks for everybody first of all and foremost, thank you again, Dr. Outlaw. Are you taking any clients right now, or is your office taking any clients at all?
Yeah, so just to throw it out there, and I'll give my little plug here, Journey of Life Psychological Incorporated. We're at 13847 East 14th in San Leandro, so we're right on the border of Oakland and San Leandro, and we do have openings. So it may not be me, depending on the availability. It may be someone else, but we have female and male therapists. And in my opinion, we're all very talented clinicians, a lot of experience. And so you can check our website at journeyoflifepsy.com. So journeyoflifepsy.com, and just kind of check out the staff profiles. Certainly we have some availability. So we got that. We also have a second office in Sacramento. So if anyone happens to catch this recording who's in Sacramento, we have 2 clinicians in Sacramento as well.
And I will personally vouch, before I met him at the 8th game, my son was going to his office, and I realized that he was going to his office when I met him, but they do a fantastic, fabulous job. So I could definitely co-sign off of just my own personal experience with my family with it, where it's always good for us to get things off our chest. So
I appreciate that, Jason. I appreciate that.
Definitely, thanks, man. Over the calendar for the next 2 weeks, we're going to have Theodis Watson. He's going to be talking about SBA programs for small business owners during these times, which is huge impact. And then that's the next week on the 14th, Then on the 21st, we will have Walter Brown, who is going to talk about opportunities and programs in the mortgage market. So some of us might be having a hard time understanding the programs that are available during this time. Some of us want to understand the opportunities that are going to be around, where some people say you're dancing on these are periods where you're dancing on graves, which is an old investing term. So it's a great time as well. So look out for those. Once again, thank you everybody for getting on the call tonight. If you guys do want the recording of this, please email me at Matthews, MATTATWS, MatthewsFinancial@gmail, or just give me a call at 510-229-7608. Everybody have a lovely evening. Enjoy some of the sun that we still have here in California for the rest of this evening. Talk to you later. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
y'all.
Jason.
Have a good
Thank
night.
you.
Hey.